I just found that lots of producers are like frustrated directors or writers or something who eventually turn to production. But I wanted to come with the more like holistic approach to producing than anything else. So as long as I know that the creator with me is coming hands-on, or whoever we're doing it with, whether it's a brand or an agency or a musician or a music label or anyone, if they're willing to co-create and give me space to create the way I want to, I don't mind taking a haircut on money. But if you come in and you tell me I want it exactly like this and there's no space to move, then I will charge you a premium. Because then I know all you're doing is taking my time and you're taking my creative kind of ability and my approach and my rigor to give you a factory made product that you have already created. Like we have to live with films for 5 years. Like a director may live with the film for a year and a half and that's it, 2 years. An actor may live with the film for 4 months. A DP may live with the film for 4 months. But as a producer, I need to live with the film for 19, 20 years. I have to do accounts for the next 15 years, wherever the film is getting sold, any rights, DVD, OTT, here, there, I have to make sure all those accounts are being done.
Hello, welcome to where we talk about films and that same joke. My name is Vidar Joshi, I'm your host, and today we have with us need and want of every filmmaker. Every filmmaker is basically a producer. So I don't want to waste any time because I really need a producer. So let's get into it. So filmmaking is one of the most expensive and collaborative art forms. And in order to execute a film very successfully, one of the key components is a producer, a person who can balance art with commerce. And today we have with us a man who understands money as competently as he understands art. And like me, he is the producer of internationally acclaimed films like Namdev Bhau in the Search of Silence, 3.5 or Teen or Aadha. He's also the producer and associate director of a lot of beautiful music videos we have been seeing recently, like Cold Mess, Knit, Sage, and so many more. Today we have with us one of the founders of Jugaad Motion Pictures, Mr. Dheer Momaya. Hi, sir. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
How are you? How are you, sir?
I am fine. You can call me Dheer. You don't need to call me sir. That's fine.
Okay.
I'm good. Thank you. How are you doing?
I'm good. So the first question is, you're a producer. The main job title is a producer. And there's a lot of confusion in the layman terms that what a producer does. Is he the one who puts in all the money, or is there something more to that thing? How do you define your job? Like, what do you do? How do you define your job?
Especially in the Indian context and the Indian cinema industry or the film industry, the producer is traditionally the person who finances the movie. And that's how it's always been through time. Of course, in America, it was very similar till the studio system kind of got set up. And then you had the big studios that were financing the movies and producers who were packaging and producing movies, actually. So within a broader sense of the term, yes, a producer is someone who does finance the film in the Indian current scenario. However, my kind of relationship with production has been very different. It's been more like the American model, which has been where I have kind of come on board, creatively packaged a project together, identified a screenplay, identified a director. In my case, it's been often the director themselves has been the writer, or often we've gone out and bought material or option rights to a book, or done some type of material purchase with finance or IP purchase with finance, and then got on specific screenwriters to go out and develop that into screenplays, and then hired a director to direct it, and then obviously, as you know, then the kind of production process takes its own course. I personally am also creatively involved in a lot of the projects that I get involved in. Apart from raising the finance and managing the production flow and the logistics of the entire operation, because as you know, every film is its own kind of logistical nightmare. Whether you're doing it on a small scale as a student film or on a large budget magnum opus kind of movie. So I've in that sense, I've been involved through and through, all the way from financing till finally marketing the material, picking the posters, and actually getting it out to get audiences to watch it. my large focus personally as a producer also comes in during the prep, so during pre and during production, and of course during post. But like creatively working with the director or the writer to find the visual style, to commit to an emotional graph or to commit to an emotional kind of atmosphere of the film, whether it's visually, whether it's narratively, across the board, kind of my involvement, at least with the directors that I've worked with, they've been quite appreciative of my involvement within those processes. Because me personally, I also kind of started my career as an amateur photographer, as in my creative career per se, as an amateur photographer and visual artist. And actually, I would say it was just something that really interested me, and I studied it extensively in my own time. And I've been able to kind of derive a lot of my understanding of visual storytelling from there, which I've then applied to my films. So in that sense, I'm slightly different. However, in India, the producer still is kind of responsible for the financing. Luckily for me, I've had really interesting and like good financiers who've backed all my films and all my projects. So yeah, I've been lucky with that.
Okay. So next question is like, why production? Why did you choose to become a producer when you started your journey as a visual storyteller, as you said?
Yeah. Good question again, because in India, lots of directors are their own producers. So if you see, like, for example, lots of the big magnum opus directors, some people that I've worked with as well in my early years, they're all producers themselves. You know, they run their own production shops and they hire line producers and executive producers to actually execute projects. Somehow I saw that there was a lack of good like creative producers in the country who were able to kind of understand and build projects almost like how directors do, you know. So even though like I have a strong directorial sense and at least for my own style and style of films and the kind of stuff that I want to do, but somewhere I thought that there wasn't someone to fulfill the producer's role, which is where kind of I decided to take it up. Also, I have a background in, I initially studied biotechnology and then I went on to study business management with a focus in accounting. So overall, and like I obviously did a lot of focus on like business law and stuff. So my overall understanding of like project management from just a legal perspective or from a tax perspective and from understanding like international co-productions, to understand what kind of tax shelters we can benefit from, what kind of rebates and like rebate systems we can benefit from. Those things I kind of found interesting. I just thought that the whole kind of like international co-production system is something that I could navigate quite well. And I just didn't find that many people around me who were focusing on that. You know, I just found that lots of producers are like frustrated directors or writers or something who eventually turn to production. But I wanted to come with the more like holistic approach to producing than anything else. Okay. And also what I always tell my directors, at least all the few that I've worked with till now, is that all the stories that I've produced for them or any of the films or any of the projects that I've produced for them, I just see them directing it better than I can, you know. Okay. So for me, as long as there's someone out there to do a job better than I can, then why should I be doing that? Okay. That's the kind of mindset that I had.
Okay. So this has been your journey. Now let's address the elephant in the room, Jugaad Motion Pictures. Like, you guys are producing finest content, like the content we actually want to see. How did Jugaad Motion Picture begin? Like, how did you, like, you were working before Jugaad Motion Pictures, then you came together with your friends and built this company. How was it? What was the process of Jugaad Motion Pictures?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like what you said, but with Jugaad, you know, see, as filmmakers, it's very easy to get lost within the industrial, like kind of the film industry, of that being either you go the Bollywood route or you go a complete independent route or you make commercials and shorter format content. And each of them have their own financial repercussions. Each of them have their own artistic repercussions and, you know, across the board. And somehow I thought at least my kind of immediate group of filmmakers that I was interacting with, all of them are like honest writers and directors. They want to tell honest stories, good stories, things that move people. They're not typically kind of sold to doing just art house projects that very few audiences will watch. So I just found that all of us were kind of like wanted to tell honest stories, and we weren't able to find a platform to tell those stories. Like I worked a bit in Bollywood for a few years as an assistant director and then as an associate producer. I mean, all of that, those were great learning experiences for me, and I'm really thankful to all the people who had me on their projects back then and kind of helped shape my idea of execution and understanding of like the way the like kind of Bollywood or the film industry works. But then somewhere we felt like we wanted to exist independently of that. And at the same time, we didn't want to be like a struggling independent filmmaker. We didn't want to be on either side of the spectrum. Which is when, we'd made our first two films completely independently. The first one, Teen Aur Aadha, we were lucky to have Anurag Kashyap, who came on board as a co-producer and as a presenter. So he kind of helped shape the journey of that movie, which eventually went to Netflix. With our second film, we decided to go even more independent than that, and said, we want like to have absolute control over all our material and the way we execute it and eventually what we do with it. So that's how Namdev Bhau was born. And I have a third movie right now, which has just finished production, which is a movie called Cello Show. It's a Pan Nalin's next movie. It's a Gujarati picture, which we've really been excited about. So while all these projects were taking shape and stuff, last year, Daria and me, who are the kind of managing partners of Jugaad, we decided that we wanted to kind of find and build relationships with other artists and like do more work. So we're able to kind of also build a kind of niche for ourselves. I don't mean an audience niche for ourselves, but like a collaborative niche for ourselves. So we get, because I mean, at the end of the day, music and film goes so deeply hand in hand. And we just felt that we hadn't explored the independent Indian music, scenario at all. Which is when we decided to take up more like music video work and stuff, and collaborate with people like Prateek and Ritviz, and Jasleen, and across the board, a lot of the kind of musicians that we were really excited about.
But the moment you took it up, you changed the entire game. Like now, like there is a narrative. Like the standard of music videos have been like, you guys uplifted it completely. And how was that process of like you decided to go to musicians, or musicians came and approached you?
Actually, I think the first one was with Prateek, and I think Prateek was looking for someone to make a video for one of his songs in his Kolmas album. I don't think it was the title track Kolmas. I think it was one of the other ones. And I had a friend of mine who works at Excel. His name is Vatsal. So Vatsal and me go back, like we were school friends basically, and both of us independently started he's 1 year older than me, but like we independently started our journey in cinema. He, of course, worked a lot with Excel and as a creative producer and as an executive producer, and I did my own thing. And him and Prateek collaborated on a couple of Excel films where they eventually, I think it was Bar Bar Dekho or something that they acquired Prateek tracks for, and they kind of built a good relationship with each other. And when Prateek was finally looking for people to do his video, Vatsal thought that we'd be a good fit, even though we hadn't really done any short format content. And unfortunately, by then I hadn't really started discovering like Indian, like me personally, I listen to music like which is pre-70s and 80s, so like I hardly even listen to any modern like American music. Leave aside, Indian modern, like independent music. So that was around the same time that I kind of discovered Prateek's music and I fell in love with it. And, it was literally around the same days that we kind of discovered each other and we started exploring doing this music video together. And then Dar heard the song and she really kind of fell in love with Prateek and his music and his sound. And of course, Prateek is as kind of visually and creatively nitpicky as we are with our work. So I mean, we found a perfect fit within that, and that's when Kolmas happened. And I think after our experience of working with Prateek on Kolmas, we realized that doing short format. Like, see, you know, when you do, like, if you're going to be a commercial Bollywood filmmaker and that's going to be the path that you take, great. And I think that's a scenario where you could eventually end up making one film every year or a film every 2 years as a director, not as a producer, as a director. And that's obviously if you can break into the star system and get the correct kind of talent attached to your project, and then based of that get a green light. Based of that, get a green light from a specific studio, or get a specific P&A budget and stuff like that. So it's all very like kind of intertwined with the talent that you get to work with. And somewhere we felt that if we want to work with good talent and like, well-known talent, we want to get people to appreciate our work across the board. We need audience appreciation of our work, which is when we decided that, you know, it could make sense. Like doing commercials as a short format project is great because it's good money. But sometimes they may not be as creatively satisfying because you may get a brief that comes in directly from an agency. Luckily, again, with the commercials that we've done, we've been really lucky to work with really talented creatives from agencies who've helped us, kind of brought us on board to co-create some of the work with them, or the material has been so good by itself that we've been able to jump on the project, and we've not really had to do those, you know, typical like Aata commercials and stuff like that, which may not be as creatively satisfying. But we thought that at least with music videos, it's a really good space to explore doing completely fresh and new narratives that we can control without having to integrate too much brand activity stuff in there, and still have the budgets to be able to do decent ideas, you know. And more than budgets, more than any of that, it was really to collaborate and work with a wide array and range of artists, you know. Specific DPs that we wanted to work with, production designers, actors, across the board, editors, sound designers. So collaborators that we otherwise would have to wait to do large format films with, explore each other. We were able to explore them on a shorter format and understand our working relationship with a lot of people. So while we got a lot of appreciation for Namdev Bhau and for 3.5 from the critical film going community, so across festivals, whether it was in Busan or at the BFI in London or Palm Springs in LA, a lot of the local kind of cinema groups and film watching groups, we got a lot of appreciation from them. We can still get a lot of letters about how our films have stuck with them through time and stuff. But because of the alternative distribution method that we took, and it wasn't mainstream theatrical cinema, there wasn't like that much wide following for our work in India within the Indian like audience scenario, you know. While we had a lot of like trade people who kind of watched our films and reached out to us, and we were able to build collaborations based of that. From the audiences, we didn't really know how Indian audiences would react to our work, which is why then with the music videos, of course, our focus was directly a YouTube Indian audience, you know. And while most of the YouTube content that goes out is very like vloggy and like very kind of like influencer based, we wanted to see that if we could put out actual like strong story based narratives which were very true storytelling, whether when we put those out, and completely they were our style, you know, it's not like we did something commercial for someone else or for a specific audience. We just stayed true to our style and to our approach to our work, and somehow that's connected widely with audiences, you know. With some of our videos getting like, you know, 100 million views across, you know, multiple platforms. So I think that appreciation is something that lots of filmmakers look for, you know, because at the end of the day, independent production is a very lonely journey. I mean, direction and writing and stuff in itself is very lonely, but independent production is also very lonely, where even though I may have a team of 10 or 12 people who work with me on a daily basis, and we have an office and, you know, it has this kind of connection, at the end of the day, it's only you fighting for yourself and batting for yourself. You know, it's not like I have a massive studio output deal where there's someone who's come and given me a blank check and said, do whatever you feel like doing, you know. And while that may be the end goal of, you know, or not an end goal, but like one of our goals to be able to get that kind of canvas to be able to tell the stories that we want to, getting there is quite hard, and it's getting there is quite lonely. So when we were able to do these music videos and we were able to get all of this love from the audiences, it made that journey less lonely, because we knew that eventually the end audience is appreciative of our work and widely appreciative of our work. And so then we know that the time and money and effort that we're investing in making these projects happen it's all actually worth it.
Yeah. So let's coming back to the beginning of Jugaad Motion Pictures. A lot of people want to start a production house. So what's the legality? How does one start a production house with a capital legally and all the other things? What's the process of starting a production house?
So I think more than anything, it's courage. Because see, it's like starting any other company, right? Like if you need to go into like the actual legalities of it, there's nothing. You could do it as a sole proprietorship. Tomorrow you could start a company and call it whatever you want to call it. And it could be just a bank account that you have, and that's how I ran my production house for many years, because I just didn't have the bandwidth to be able to incorporate an LLC and stuff like that. I registered the name Jugaad Motion Pictures, and then I just started running productions through my company, right? So I think the actual legalities of it are very simple.
It's just
you need to make sure you're within compliance of compliance. You need to make sure you follow all the compliance of GST and TDS and all of those things, which are very important, which lots of filmmakers don't do, and then they end up with massive fines and stuff that they have to pay. And especially because our business is such a project-to-project business that we often make professional payments and stuff to specific creators or specific artists that we're engaging for a specific project. And then we end up like missing out on cutting the TDS or paying the GST or like filing our returns. And then that can spiral a lot. So those things you need to really make sure you get right. You need to make sure that you have a lawyer or a friend. Like for me, I couldn't afford lawyers. I still can't afford lawyers. I mean, even though I can, like I prefer not having them. I do a lot of the deals myself. So I studied IP law extensively myself. Like I went to the library, picked up books and read most of the stuff that there is to read about like underlying intellectual property rights, what derivative rights mean, what exploitation rights mean. So, and I was only able to do all of that on the go. As and when people were sending me contracts, I was able to break them down. I had my cousin brother who's a lawyer. I'm very thankful to him because I was able to take him my contracts and have him explain certain things to me. So it is a 24/7 job, like right now also, even though I'm doing a lot of like creative work on a day-to-day basis, I also have a lot of legal work and paperwork that I have to get through, every day. Which I have to look at and make sure that the NDAs that I'm signing, they're not blocking me out from doing any further work. If there's a non-compete happening where I can't work with a competing brand or a competing thing, I need to make sure that I'm getting paid my premium for that. I need to make sure that all my talent contracts and stuff are more or less are more or less watertight, so that in case there's a brand that wants to make sure that for 6 months that the talent that we use in the commercial that we're doing with them, they want to make sure for 6 months that talent is not seen in a competitor's brand. I need to make sure I get those papers signed as well. So there are a few kind of compliance things that you need to be careful of. But the biggest thing that you need when you start a production company is the right kind of talent, right? Like I was blessed to have Dheer as my kind of in-house writer director to go to, where all the projects that came to us, we were able to take to her, and she was able to make magic out of them, And at the end of the day, that's what eventually speaks for itself. No matter how much, like we've never spent a single rupee in marketing our brand as Jugaad Motion Pictures. Not a single rupee has been spent on Instagram, Facebook, running ads or doing any of that to get more followers. It's all been absolutely organic. It's all been, I've never ever even called up a single musician or anything, said, hey, I'm Jugaad Motion Pictures, I would love to work with you. This is what we've done. I've never pitched myself to anyone. In that sense, we've been really lucky that people have watched some of our work and then got in touch with us. And those are the only projects we've been taking. One of the reasons for that also is that since our work is so kind of driven by honesty and creativity, like honest creativity and like an honest approach to our storytelling. I don't want to like kind of pitch myself out to someone who may want something else, but I convince him with my pitch that I'm the right guy for it. And then eventually it comes to being something completely different from what he expected, So I prefer having it the other way. But the early days were difficult, man. Like I remember when we were doing 3.5 and Namdev Bhau, and we didn't have any like direct income coming in from like smaller format and shorter format projects, from commercials or music videos or whatever. It was tough. Like each and every lakh was like was money we couldn't spend. I remember eventually at one point, just because we were frozen up with last 4 lakhs that we needed for a specific part of our post-production, we had to wait 5.5 months to get that money,
You
and
ran
today,
a crowdfunding campaign, right?
We did run a crowdfunding campaign. Yes, on Wishberry for 3.5. Exactly. So then we eventually ran a crowdfunding campaign through which we were able to raise the money, and then we were able to finish 3.5, So in that sense, those days were really difficult. Now when I look back on it, like those seem like such small, even though it was only a year and a half ago, I feel like the whole process, even though Jugaad only started doing shorter format projects and ads a year and a half ago, basically a year ago even maybe is when it really took off. It feels like a lifetime ago. It feels like a decade ago. It feels like, all of those problems were so far gone back then, when I couldn't imagine where a project was being held up because of a few lakhs of rupees, because that's eventually what you spend on like a location now, on something much smaller within the larger production perspective. So I think I've been really grateful that my journey has accelerated itself quite quickly in the last 1 year. But it was a struggle, man. Like I remember even earlier convincing brands or music, brands to give us money for projects was very difficult. Now it's the opposite. Now, we're constantly getting calls from like different brands and agencies, and we have to decide what projects we want to take up rather than the other way around.
And speaking of content, you mentioned that honest storytelling, and that is seen in everything you have done till now. That's the best part. Like the content is selling itself. Like you don't have to market your thing or anything. One biggest thing you guys have achieved is to create create a particular type of content and then gather your audience instead of catering a particular type of audience, which is the usual conventional way. So what was your process like before starting the production house? Did you have that this is the type of content we want to make? We want to just do this type of content and then the audience will come around. So let's start this company and we'll produce a particular type of content, and this will be the unique part about our production house. Was that thing in your mind, or it's organic?
So your question is whether the format of the content or the kind of approach that we have to our story
and type of content. Format is you mentioned that shorter format was a later on thing,
right?
Yeah.
So I mean, it's very difficult to say. I don't think that our we've ever changed our style for any specific audience or for any specific reason, apart from what the actual project lent itself to. So like, for example, when we're developing a project, inherently within that script or within that film or within that world, you will find that piece of material lends itself to a specific kind of treatment. Whether that treatment be casting a specific kind of cast or an actor that has X amount of social media equity, or someone completely fresh, someone completely new, or a driver, as a matter of fact, someone who's been a car driver for the last 40 years. I think each project lends itself to its own kind of treatment, and each project lends itself to having its own audience and its own life. Like when we were going into 3.5, we knew that we were making a film with a meditative rhythm that may not get in like theatrical distribution, cross-country theatrical distribution. It's not a film that's going to get that. We didn't have the kind of stars built into that project that would allow for a 3,000 screen cinema distribution, right? So we know what we're going into. However, sometimes projects, you go in assuming something and then they turn out to be something completely different. Either they're failures or they're massive successes, and you have to be ready for both. We're planned for both, because at the end of the day, film is such a subjective kind of medium of consumption that you may think that you're making something very small and it may turn out to be something very big, and you may think that you're making something very big but no one wants to watch it. So I think that uncertainty is something that all of us have gotten used to, and that embraced more than gotten used to. It's something that we embrace going into every project, And I don't think that we've ever approached a project which has not been true to our style or our kind of cinematic universe that we want to create. It's just that the kind of storytellers we are, we like to have certain themes or avoid certain themes or avoid certain like conventional traps that go into storytelling, which then make us seem fresher than what may otherwise be going out. But it's not something that we're actively trying to achieve. We're just being honest to ourselves. We're just being every project that suddenly does well or that gets certain amount of viewership or that people are happy with. We've gone into that project exactly the same way we've gone into a project that may not have had the same, you know. Like for example, we had one of like Darya's and my favorite music video that we've done. I mean, that for our own like something that we're very personally connected to and we feel a lot about, has the least amount of viewership. And like hardly any people have seen it. Like 40,000 people have seen it. You know what I mean? And as compared to like some of the other ones which have millions of followers, millions of views and stuff like that, and like we've gotten a lot of like separate following based of those. This one is something that's really close to us, but somehow for whatever reason it was, whether it was the issue with the distribution that the brand did or the agency did, or the song itself, or the idea of how people have accepted it, somehow it just kind of got constrained, you know, and like it didn't work out. But I still feel like that was some of my best work, you know. And I guess that that's just part of the process, and you know, you win some and you lose some, and we're just grateful for right now that even though we've been just very honest to ourselves and told stories that we want to without anyone interfering with us, people have liked it. So I think that has been quite motivating.
People not interrupting the films or stories you want to tell. So one of the films you produced was Namdev Bhau, and you said that it was completely independent. But that was at the initial stage of your you becoming independent. So what was the process? Because we had a conversation with Aditya Verma about that, and I'm sure you might have some really interesting stories, because the budget was not like huge, but the film looks amazing and the story is very powerful. You got the international acclaim and everything. What was the process of producing your completely independent
film? Well, yeah, I mean, you know, back then we were so, I mean, at least me as a producer, I was very like naive, you know, in the sense that I did not want to go out and build an international co-production around it. I did not want to go out and put it into script labs and really make it like an internationally financed and produced film. Because we were impatient, you know, Darya and me were super impatient people. We've learned patience now over the years slightly, but like back then, I'm talking about 2 years ago, we were very impatient. We had a very like strong artistic ego that needed to be satisfied, which was that we want to make movies and no one can stop us from making movies. And actually the fact of the scenario is that we never pitched that movie to anyone. It's not like we pitched it, we never, even 3.5, it's not like we pitched it to 15 log ko pitch kiya, we heard no from 15 people, and that's why we said we'll go and do it independently. Actually, we've never pitched that to a single person. What happened was I got lucky to raise finance for my first film, 3.5. And we were able to raise a little slightly more finance than we needed for the project. So we had a little bit left over eventually. And like it was a very like fractured production process. It's not like ek hi baar mein we started and we ended and film khatam ho gaya. With 3.5, we shot the first 2 parts. 3.5, the whole film exists in 3 long takes. So essentially it's three schedules that we needed to film. So the first 2 we managed, and for the third one, we eventually waited for almost a year to film it. Because we were not able to get the right kind of cast that we wanted. And we were talking to a few like very large stars from that age group. And conversations went all the way around, and we could not pay any talent any money, nor our DP, nor our sound designer, nor our actors. No one got paid a single dime and dollar, because it's not like we had any money, you know. The writer, producer, director, we had spent many years on this project and we were not making a single rupee on production, you know. So we could not offer that to any of our creative collaborators either. But because of Dar's vision and because of the kind of environment that she creates around herself when she's making a film, lots of people just got attached to it. So while we were waiting to make the third part of 3.5, so the third sequence, Darya kind of conceptualized, there was an idea that I and like a couple of other people that work with us, we'd been playing with an idea of like how to deal with sound, you know, because it was something that was really irritating us through time. And we had this idea of a man going crazy with the city sounds, you know, of like Bombay city sounds. And then Dar was able to take that and like really craft something much more deep and much more beautiful around it, which apart from being much more entertaining, also had a lot of emotional and thematic value, you know. So when she wrote that and she wrote that film, we had some money left over from 3.5, which we then convinced our investor to say, listen, you wanted one film, what if we give you 2 films, you know? And we'll keep the same financing deal for you, the same that it is for 3.5. We'll keep the same financing deal for you for Namdev Bhau. And luckily, I don't know how most financiers would say, no, just finish this film. I don't want you focusing on something else. It was anyways micro-budget productions. And he knew that we were coming from a pure intention of doing good work rather than trying to scheme someone of their money and trying to do any of that. And there was a huge trust cycle that had been built between the both of us. So we were lucky and he said, sure, you know, go ahead and do it. But the budget was so minuscule that literally there was like nothing that we could afford, you know. So whatever, we couldn't even afford going for a recce. So we were literally recceing locations few days before we were filming it. So within that, so you could imagine the kind of logistical nightmare we were facing, but we still had the spirit, you know, we had the spirit that we wanted to make. And we know that we had the spirit that whatever we make is going to be emotionally satisfying to the person who watches it. I don't know whether it's going to be a large scale production or it's going to look like a very professionally done film, or I don't know any of those things. Luckily at the end of it, it did. And like we were really lucky to have cinematographers like Akash Raj on 3.5 and Aditya Verma on Namdev Bhau, who were able, with the frugal resources that they had, which was basically nothing, without first ACs, without any of that, they were able to build a visual palette which actually translates very nicely onto the big screen, you know. So we were, again, those were all things that we were just lucky to have. Darya and me, as when we were developing the project, we knew that we had to write it with a certain visual limitation, a scale limitation. But that didn't stop us. You know, we still were dreaming big and we were still trying to make things work with what we had. So I think that relentless spirit is something that I learned from Darya. I personally, as a producer, you know, we always like to err on the side of caution. And we always say, until we have full financing, we don't want to go into production because then we'll be stuck and we won't have money for post, we won't have money for this. And I think it was Darya's kind of approach to her work, which was either it's now or never. I am making this film no matter what, let's do it. And we said, okay, fine, you know what, let's make it happen. And at the end of the day, a producer can only be as effective as the director is, you know. If I have a director who's very production friendly, and I've worked with a lot of directors who are not very production friendly, and it's not a good or bad thing, it's great because they've also given us very good end results and end projects, and that's fine. But like for films like 3.5 and Namdev Bhau, it needed to have someone, a director like Dar, who's as much a producer herself, you know, who as much understands what she needs to keep and what she needs to, what she can let go of to still maintain the original idea of the film, you know? Without compromising too much, at the same time, without being too kind of constrained, you know, with the vision. So I think that was essential.
So this is one part, one half, the passionate storytellers. The other half is collaborating with companies, clients, musicians. And there's this, like, people don't usually get this, that producing and the money part is one half and managing people, managing the egos is the other half. So how do you approach the negotiation with the companies, clients, musicians? And as you said right now that some directors are not production friendly. So that part as well, how do you go about that, like managing people?